Okay, so I'm going to pose a couple of questions to you. What do you do if you're not great at figurine modelling and you've got two cake designs going around in your head and you can't decide which one you want to go with? The answer's pretty simple. You make a cutout, double-sided cake. I'm Janine and you're watching That's Cakeable. So making this cake, I wanted it to be as awesome on the inside as it is on the outside. So what I've done is I've started with a 5-inch round chocolate cake, filled that with some gorgeous dark chocolate ganache. I baked some soft, chewy chocolate chip cookies and I cut them into 5-inch rounds to fit the cake. I topped that with some homemade caramel, sprinkled some salt on top of the caramel for that saltiness. And if that wasn't enough, I've added some French buttercream on top of that. Stacked another layer of cake on the top, and so on and so forth until I got to the top. Because the cake was so tall, I decided to put a skewer through the cake just to give it a bit more security while I was putting it together. Then I came in and I took my ganache and of course gave it the obligatory crumb coat. Once that was chilled, I came back in, placed my board on the top as I usually do, and then I gave it its final ganache coat. Once I removed the board, I added just a little bit more ganache to the top to make sure it was nice and level. Then I took a warm scraper and I just took it around the side of the cake to form a lip above the top of the cake. Once that's chilled, you can come back in with a nice hot blade and slice off the excess and get a nice sharp edge. A really, really simple way of doing it. Okay, now on to decorating our half and half cake. I've taken a piece of blue fondant between two spaces and rolled that out. Then I did the same with a white piece of fondant. Then I cut a straight edge off each of those pieces of fondant. I now have a 5-inch cake board that I've cut exactly in half and I'm putting that on the top of the cake. And I'm butting one of the pieces of fondant right up against that half of the cake board to make sure that it's nice and centered. Those cake boards will come in handy later, so it's not wasting. Remove that top cake board and then I added the white. Buttered that right up against the blue and smoothed them together. I did get a little bit of shifting because I've used vegetable shortening for this process, but they easily went back together. Once they're both on, I took my X-Acto blade, went around the edge of the cake and took off all the excess. Using my smoother again, and the top of my cake was done. To do the sides of the cake, I've taken the coinciding colours and I've measured the height of the cake and half the circumference of the cake. Using my spacers again to make sure that they're the same width fondant, I rolled out pieces big enough to cover each half of the cake, took one piece of the fondant onto my rolling pin and wrapped that around the side of the cake coinciding with the top colour. I hope that all makes sense. I'm sure that the footage will explain it better than I can. Then I took my ruler and where the two colours overlap, right in the centre line there, I cut a line straight through both pieces of fondant, removed the excess fondant off the top colour, removed that flap just slightly, then took off the fondant that was left over underneath, and then pushed both colours back together to make a seam. Just like that. I took my smoother and then smoothed both sides of the cake where the seams met. Cake's covered. And of course, you'll have to come in with the X-Acto blade and cut off the top section of the fondant also to make it nice and flush with the top of the cake. And now the cake is ready to decorate. On the white side, I wanted to go with a whimsical sort of woodland theme, And for the background, I just took some edible gold dust mixed with some alcohol to paint just some random short vertical stripes all over the cake. For the blue side, I wanted to add some scenery, so I'm using the transfer method that I explain more in depth in my popcorn and Pennywise cake tutorial. So you can go and have a look at that here. I've just taken a piece of green fondant that I've laid out on a piece of parchment paper that I've covered with shortening, cut out some mountain shapes with my pizza cutter, and then attach that to the blue side of the cake. For my clouds, I got out of that pretty easily. I had some cloud cutters left over from my cookie days, so I cheated and used them. Of course, you can go freehand and they will be just fine. I attached those clouds to the side of the cake with just a little bit of water. Okay, now I have to suscify this scenery. It's easily done by just adding thin black outlines to everything and small strokes of black painted sporadically just on the inner of the outside lines. I used black airbrush colour and drew some grass around the hills too. Suscified. Okay, onto the most tricky part of this, I would say, the cutouts. So print out the picture you want to size and rub a graphite pencil on the back. Now, some people have issues with using pencil on cake, however, I'm fine with it. Graphite is a non-toxic product, and to me, it's not really that different to using edible dust, etc. on your cakes. If you're uncomfortable with it, however, you can just outline the picture straight onto your fondant without the use of pencil, although it'll be a lot more of a challenge to see the impression. If you're lucky enough to have a projector, you can use one of those, or you can freehand. I've taken some food colouring that I've actually watered down with a little bit of alcohol, and I'm painting in the colour. Then using my black airbrush colour and a very fine paintbrush again, I go around the outside of the image. I went ahead and did exactly the same thing for the woodland animal side of the cake, but of course there was no colour in these guys, so no colour was necessary. This part will test your patience. It is easier than making figurines, I would say, but you then have to go in with your X-Acto blade and cut around your cutout. For the very fine parts, it's quite a challenge. But it's so worth it. I just took some more black airbrush colour and tidied up the edges that were, you know, a little bit banged up from the cutting process. Back to those boards, I told you we'd use them again. So I'm using the boards as a center partition for our cake. I've taken the board and I've put some piping gel on that board, and then I've covered that with one of the coinciding colors, you'll need one of each, and cover that cake board with that color very thinly. Then I flip it upside down and cut off the excess, and there it is. I went ahead and added a little bit of decoration to each of those backboards and then set them aside to dry. Now once they were dry, I took my hot glue gun and just made 2 lines of hot glue on one side of the board, placed some skewers on that hot glue, placed some more hot glue over those skewers again, and then attached the second half over the top. Now to make it look finished and tidy it up, I just took some glue stick, ran it over the top and sides of that board, and then added a piece of white ribbon, took it all the way down, trimmed off the excess, and it was neat and tidy. After I'd attached all of my cutouts to my cake and put some toppers on, which I made exactly the same way as I made the cutouts, just made them a little thicker and put toothpicks in the bottom of them, I found the center of my cake, added the center partition, and voila, my double-sided celebration cake. Well guys, I hope you loved watching me put this cake together as much as I loved making it. It was a bit more time consuming than I had originally anticipated. However, if you do have trouble with making figurine models, this is the way to go for sure, and what a great effect you end up with. Well, I don't know how I'd feel about it if I was close in birthdays to somebody else, but this cake could definitely be used for joint birthday parties for, say, twins or other family members that just share their birthdays close together. And of course, you can convert this to any theme that you wish. Well guys, thank you so much for joining me again. If you like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't as yet, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Also, if you're just taking it easy and chillaxing, remember you can check out my other tutorials here. Well guys, that's the end of this week's video. I hope you really enjoyed it. Go and get your cake on, and I will see you next time. Bye.